Everybody was panicking and leaving their home behind. No one was calm. Nothing was calm during this time.
A girl named Edna Boot and her family lived in a small town called Madrid, Alabama. Although their town was completely affected by the Spanish flu, Edna's family were the only ones who weren't sick. They felt bad for the people who were sick, so they became nurses. They took care of the sickened and tried to find a cure. But although they worked around the clock to find a cure, but they could not find one, the virus ended before they could isolate it.
Her mother used to tell her about the flu and its symptoms. She said there was not enough medicine to go around to treat the disease. Many people were lined up at the only doctor's door in town. The way of transportation was a wagon, but most people would die before they got there. Her and her twin brother had to persevere to help their family out. They had jobs such as taking food and wood to the sickened people. She was very young, so she didn't understand much of what was going on. Although Edna didn't remember much, she remembered how stressed everybody was. Edna said this epidemic was very stressful, but it brought her small town together.
The Spanish flu affected people all over the world. Most people who went through this epidemic were not calm at all. In fact, they were all terrified. The people who weren't sick were telling others to help others who were sick. The symptoms of the disease were deadly and painful. The medical effects that came with this disease were extremely deadly and painful. The autopsy showed hard, red lungs. It would start out like any other influenza with a sore throat, chills, and a slight fever. The disease would ravage out the victim's lungs and they would develop complete respiratory failure. People say when they had the Spanish flu they could hardly breathe. They would also complain about severe headaches. Her mother said the baking soda would help neutralize their systems and help them be less likely to get the disease. I remember seeing people in severe pain and agony.
Now I understand how the baking soda would help them be less likely to get the disease. I couldn't imagine going through what those people went through. It makes me feel better to know that although Ella was stressed, in the end it brought her and her small town closer.
You may be wondering how the economy was socially affected by this epidemic.
The disease canceled a lot of important events such as school, work, and family functions.
People lost their social trust.
During this epidemic, many countries started restricting trade to prevent the disease from spreading. It was very hard for people to understand what was going on since they didn't know much about the disease. I could not imagine being there during this time, especially since everybody was all crowded up in large groups trying to get away from the war.
It sounds tragic. All the streets were empty. About 500 million individuals were affected, which is a third of the world's population.
The male population went down the most during this epidemic. I could not imagine going through this and catching the Spanish flu.
The Spanish flu never really went away, since a lot of the people had been exposed to the virus and therefore had developed immunity against it. In the 1918 strand began to mutate and evolve a process called antigenetic drift. Slightly altered versions of the 1918 flu came back in the winters of 1918 and 1920 and 1920 through 1921, but they were far less deadly and nearly indistinguishable from the first seasonal flu. Science say the Spanish flu will never go away. People will just begin to get immunity to it.